Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I'm terrible. How about that? I'm a terrible person, apparently, and terrible at getting the radio show started on time. I don't know. We're going to try and do one anyway. No chance this is going to go well. I can't see it working out this morning. All right, let's see. All is in chaos here today, and everybody had some fantastic ideas to start the day. One of the kids' ideas was, I'll miss the bus. And I'll have you drive me in the barely limping minivan that we were trying to replace yesterday, spending the day at the fabulous and very high-class CarMax, looking for a used minivan. It's a glamorous life. We live here. And so I had to hope against hope that I could get him to the high school and back without the radiator falling apart. And I did, but I'm not positive that the radiator didn't actually collapse and won't fall out of the car out in front during the show. And we had another member of the household decide that a great time to start the washing machine, which is directly above where we broadcast from, would be right before the show. So we'll see how that goes. Thankfully, I think we just might have missed the noisiest spin cycle and rinse, and I don't know. So we'll see whether it comes out across the radio or not. We'll try our best, and of course, missing the bus cost me breakfast this morning, so I'm not really super happy about that. So, update on the important news is minivan not yet replaced, but some good candidates over at the used car lot. And I guess now we got to go to the bank and see about getting loans, etc. So it was a fun holiday weekend. How are you? All right, so some things happened over the weekend. We'll catch up with some of them. I don't even have Greg Dworkin to lean on today, but we'll limp through. Nonetheless, there's plenty of stories, no doubt, and Justice gives me the thumbs up in his inimitable way. Everything appears to be working 5. Levels are 5 by 5. Uber alles, he tells me. And that's good news. Yeah. Let's see. Over the weekend, Trump went and played golf. Yes. He did not have his generals submit his plan. Remember that back in September he began with this, and he would on day one he was going to order his generals to give him a new plan. He was going to give them 30 days to put a new plan to defeat ISIS on his desk. That bill came due on Saturday. And, or was it Saturday or was it Sunday? I think Saturday it came due. And it didn't show up. So no plan as far as anyone can tell. However, I did learn along the way in my countdown. And I knew a couple of days before we got to the critical point of the countdown. But Trump's excuse for this will be that he did, in fact, start the 30-day clock. It wasn't that he forgot entirely. It was that he signed what he had styled an executive order, but what was, in fact, a presidential memorandum on January 28th. He signed a presidential memorandum giving the Pentagon their 30-day time limit to put a super-duper plan to defeat ISIS on his desk. That means, well, that in their mind, of course, that they haven't yet missed the deadline. In my mind, I'm not so forgiving if you say it's going to happen on day one and it doesn't occur to you until day 8 to write a note that says, please give me a plan. In other words, it took him a week plus to come up with the words he was going to use to ask somebody else to do the work. I don't know. So from this point forward, once the 30-day clock rings off of, once the alarm rings off of day one, I think at that point, all delays are on you, and any delay that they have in handing over the plan to you is a delay you'll have in implementing the plan, which only means, of course, chaos and death, and it's all on you. So I just thought I would bring that one up. All right, so we're at day 32 or so of the actual clock from day one, and I guess sometime around next weekend, the 30-day clock runs out on the order of the 28th, and we'll see what they come up with. All right. Well, what's in my inbox this morning in the KITM hashtag? Of course, Bill's post from Portland, Maine, Daily Coast Radio is live now. You've been hearing it for the past 6 minutes, washing machine and all. Actually, I don't hear too much from the washing machine, so I think we lucked out on that one. Daily Coast Radio is live. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Updates which sex cult members are attending CPAC and which ones are banned. Yes, as it turns out, yesterday would have been a good day to be on the air. There was a lot going on that we have touched on, and perhaps you spent the day strutting around happy that you were a more or less informed person, and you already knew, for instance, among other things, that the alt-right is a sex cult, and we'll discuss that just a little bit, and put a finer point on some of its bigger players as well, actually leaning on somebody who knows, appears to me to know what they're talking about, even though, by comparison, I do not. So I can't judge for sure, but they sure look like they know what they're talking about to me. Anyway, there was that. Let's see. Oh, yes, everyone found out this weekend and on Sunday and Monday about Felix Sater. I don't know if we ever decided how to pronounce his name. The Russian dude who is the Trump and Trump Soho connection with Bayrock and everybody else who is laundering all the crazy Russian money that's coming through, and with which Trump financed much of his post-bankruptcy empire, if it can even be described that way. And, so we already knew about that guy. And what else? I can't even remember what other thing we were looking at that we said, oh, yeah, we were right about that, too. Well, I'll try and remind myself. And let's see. All right, I'm a little bit behind in getting everything set up today. We made it to the microphone again by the skin of our teeth here. So my usual collection of stories is not yet in place. I'm going to have to answer this person too. All right, let's see. I got see now, how is this happening? Did you just start following? I have Clonopin Chronicles, who tweets as Clonnie Cron, KLONNIECHRON, and a follower on Twitter, but with the question, what's KITM? What's the hashtag? I'm looking all over the place and I can't figure it out. And the answer is, of course, it's Kagro in the morning, but I'll have a chance to go ahead and answer that later on. Yes. Right. Parlio reminds us also over the weekend, I can't believe I haven't brought this up yet, the horrible events over the weekend in Sweden, which I'm sure there have been some, but yes, there was, of course, the rally that Trump held the other day. Did he do it Friday or did he do it Saturday? I can't even remember. But he spent the weekend in Mar-a-Lago again, third one in a row. Played golf again, and I believe he's now been to the golf course 7 times. This is also an interesting, a mini drama developing, I guess, among all the other things. It's certainly one of the least important aspects of, all the stupid things that are going on with Donald Trump. But one of them is he plays golf a lot. That's not even really a thing that goes on because lots of people play golf a lot. And in total, Barack Obama played golf a lot too. As a matter of fact, I was rather surprised to read by, I think, Mark Knoller's count. Who else would count this? Barack Obama, over 8 years, played 333 rounds of golf. That's actually quite a bit of golf, and I think it comes out to something around slightly less than once a week. And I think he managed that by occasionally going on golfing vacations and then playing the living crap out of whatever course he was at 4 or 5 times in a weekend, and that'll tend to do it. But okay, you're on vacation. Donald Trump, all right, right now, he's running a little bit ahead of Barack Obama in that he has been to the golf course 7 times in the month that he's been there. So he's running about every 4.5 days. Although it's not entirely clear whether he plays an entire round of golf every time he goes, and that's what lands us here. The White House apparently feels the need to obfuscate somewhat about exactly how much golf he's playing, in addition to which they seem to be interested in hiding who he plays with. That makes a little bit more sense in terms of just like the secretive regime will always kind of protect that stuff, but it shouldn't, but they do. And I don't know. I mean, am I normalizing it by saying that? All right. Well, anyway, they also now, they want to hide the amount of golfing that he's doing. And Trump fans are playing along. They're actually interested for some reason in gaslighting you about golf playing. And we may be overstating the case a little bit and using the term gaslighting. And I think there's been I'll leave it up to people who originally began using the term to decide whether we've overdone it and are somehow diluting the charge, because to say that you're being gaslighted about the amount of golf that the president plays sort of removes it from its original context, which was, sexist in nature for one thing, all right. Well, anyway, you'll see what I'm talking about, I guess, when we get around to reading this other thread about the sex cult biz, which isn't about sex cults, but which I made about sex cults because I wanted it to be about sex cults because that was the point I was trying to make, and I've upset the author of the thread. Anyway, Trump fans are interested for whatever reason in insisting to the rest of us that Donald Trump plays considerably less golf than he does. And I don't know how much time we really want to invest in fighting about that, but I think it's interesting to note that they'll do this about almost anything. Trump fans, when I pointed out that the newspapers were reporting that his Saturday trip to the golf course was his 6th, and his Sunday, or rather Monday, I believe, trip to the golf course was his 7th, they were busy insisting that Trump had only played golf once with the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, and that was it. And all the rest, all the other golf outings that we were counting were fake news. I'm not really sure what the advantage is in all of this, but I don't know whether they necessarily need to see an advantage in order to decide to try and screw you up. Anyway, as it happens, there's some actual reporting on the subject. In addition to, but I found this was interesting, that in addition to his cheating at golf scores, his fans cheat at counting how many times they play golf. I guess because golf, the lower your score is, the lower your number is, the better your score. Maybe that's it. The less golf he plays, the better that is. I really don't know. This is a report from The Hill that says the White House adds to report on Trump's Sunday golf game. Apparently, the White House told everybody that he played a few holes, sorry, totally different thing. A few holes of golf on Sunday. And I don't know, that was supposed to sound better because I'm only playing a few holes. I don't know how many holes that might be. 9? 4? Doesn't really matter. But I guess the idea was to show that he's actually quite busy with lots of meetings because he has no national security advisor. And he thought, people should think, yes, I'm relaxing on my trip, but also I'm trying to get a national security advisor and fill up my cabinet, et cetera, et cetera. I've got important things to do. I'm president. Anyway, one of the people he decided to play with is professional golfer Rory McIlroy, which sounds like a big thrill, I guess. I mean, he does play with professional golfers from time to time. Trump is we've been over about whether or not he's any good at golf. I don't think he's bad. I think he's actually a good amateur player because he spends a lot of time at it and he enjoys it. And apparently he had some athleticism in his background. Whether that's disappeared entirely or not, I don't know. but not entirely out of place. But remember also, he's also claimed that he's a scratch golfer and plays PGA Tour level golf. He probably does not. Anyway, Rory McIlroy played with him. I believe Ernie Els was reported to have joined him on his round with the Prime Minister of Japan, which was interesting. And he's played in the past with Tiger Woods and all sorts of celebrities. Anyway, it turns out that the White House says, okay, he played a few holes of golf on Sunday. Pardon me, got a frog in my throat today, too, on top of all the other things. But apparently he intended to play a few holes, but he decided to play longer because he's the president. He's a decider. He also had a full day of meetings, calls, and interviews for the new NSA, which he's continuing today before returning to Washington, D.C. tonight. That would have been yesterday. But all of that fell apart when Rory McIlroy decided, I'm proud of having, or excited about having played golf with Donald Trump, celebrity, and President of the United States, and I'd like to talk about it and say that he did pretty good. He reports that the president shot, as he said, about an 80. I don't know whether he was clear on, I don't know whether Trump definitely kept score or not, and I think it's fair game to say, yeah, around 80. It doesn't matter to me if he shaves a few points, pick up a ball here and there, I guess if he's not in competition, right? And 80, that's good. That is a legitimately very good amateur score. So, okay. But he decided to tell everybody, yeah, he played a full round with him. And then they asked the White House, hey, the guy you played golf with says you played more than a few holes. Said you played a full, all right. He played more. He did, okay? So, I mean, why you wouldn't just say that, I don't know, but it might have something to do with his long history of having tweeted angry recriminations about Barack Obama playing golf, including the one that they include here in the Hill piece, saying, while our wonderful president was out playing golf today, the TSA, not the NSA, but the TSA is falling apart, just like our government. Trump tweeted last year, airport's a total disaster. So, all right, Armando says, no, Trump shot 80 for 9 holes. That, I believe, that would actually be quite a bad score. And whatever. Okay, so there you have it. I thought it was interesting because mostly I would have passed on the whole thing if it wasn't for the fact that a couple of Trump supporters tweeted me all day yesterday about denying that he had played golf more than one time. And I found that a little bit strange. All right. Let's see. There's many other things that are strange. Parlio notes here, the Swedes will never make it through an additional 8 days of ISIS assault. That's probably true. The Swedes are having a tough time over there figuring out what they were attacked by. You've heard this story by now, but just to put it on the record here, during the rally, he was trying to make a point about terrorism, and he did his usual thing. Look at this, look at that, look at look at what happened here, look at what happened here, and as often happens, the crescendo of this is look at XYZ, and XYZ is a made-up event. It's not Bowling Green this time, but it might as well have been. He says, look at what happened in Sweden last night. And I don't think anybody has figured out what... Well, I guess nothing happened in Sweden last night. He doubly confused himself. First of all, he was trying to make a point about terrorism, and he referred to Sweden as if he had seen something happen in Sweden. And the thing that was stuck in his mind, apparently, about Sweden had to do with refugee resettlement. In other words, had to do with immigration and Sweden's willingness to take Middle Eastern refugees and resettle them there, and the right-wing claim that having done so and having taken them in tremendous numbers, particularly in with respect or relative to the population of Sweden, that they were now experiencing some kind of horrible crime wave. And this, too, apparently breaks down along ideological lines. If you believe the Swedish and American, to this point, American government, the last American administration, there's no particular problem whatsoever with resettling refugees in Sweden Though I imagine anytime you bring a refugee population in and they're in desperate straits and poor, I would expect, I guess, to see some increase in crime. But the claims that I have seen are, in fact, the opposite. And that crime rates, the claim is that crime rates drop in areas with high immigrant populations. I wouldn't have guessed that, but there are a lot of things that statistics bear out that you wouldn't have guessed, and it's the reason you have statistics, to make sure that you're not just assuming BS. Anyway, so that's the word, but the right wing believes that there's an enormous crime wave, and that in particular the suburbs or outer rim of the city of Malmo, which I'm sure I've horribly pronounced, is suffering some tremendous crime wave, but I mean to the point where I should have put this aside. I saw somebody tweeting that. Well, let's see. First of all, there's some right-wing weirdos, and it might be Breitbart, who are saying, yeah, I dare any of you who think that this resettlement in Sweden is going well to go to, we'll pay your ticket, in fact, to go to Malmo, Sweden, and you'll experience just there. You frequently hear somebody said explosions daily, just walking down the street, like as if it were a war zone. So it might be worth checking out exactly what the hell's going on in Malmo, if for no other reason than to say, I really didn't hear any explosions and I wasn't even killed once. I think you could probably count on one hand the number of times I've been killed in Malmo, Sweden, and continue on that one hand for some time. Anyway, I don't really know why they were worried about that, but the Trump comments were apparently prompted by I guess we would have to say, quote unquote, documentary shot by somebody with an interest in making people, particularly Fox News viewers, believe that there's this tremendous crime wave going on among the immigrant population in and around Malmo, or I guess all over Sweden for that matter. And Trump saw it on TV, on Tucker Carlson's show, and said, Sweden, immigrants problem. Immigrants terrorism thing, I believe. Something, yada, yada. Okay. Rally time. Look at what happened in Sweden last night. Nothing happened in Sweden. Even in the area of crimes committed by immigrants in Malmo, nothing in particular happened in Sweden the night before. It was that what happened the night before was he saw a segment on television that talked about immigration in Sweden, and all of that in the mishmash of his head came out as there was a big terrorist attack in Sweden yesterday. And that's all there was to it. The Swedish ambassador, apoplectic, the Swedish government making fun of him, a huge weekend for Sweden memes, etc., including the very funny one with the Swedish flag and an IKEA Allen wrench that says, we will rebuild, right? I've seen that one. Je suis IKEA hashtag. Yeah. It's been interesting the last couple of days, no doubt about it. Okay, so let's see. Other things that have made the news. Yes, many people pointing out the vandalism at a Jewish cemetery in the St. Louis area. It says hundreds of graves vandalized, gravestones, tombstones toppled, which gave me an opportunity to take a look at how tombstones are constructed. Very interesting, the way they put those things together. Some of them apparently too well constructed to be toppled. So we should be talking to those people about how to make the replacements. But yeah, they pushed over a bunch of tombstones. Cemetery desecration kind of has a history, and it's kind of a Nazi history, but we're seeing that emerge all over the place too. So that, I guess, on top of the dozens and dozens of bomb threats at Jewish community centers around the country, and every time, for whatever reason, every time Trump and the White House are confronted about what are you going to do about these rising anti-Semitic incidents, insists that the questioner is really accusing them of anti-Semitism. And, well, we're hopeful that Queen Esther Ivanka is going to be able to talk her dad into just kind of accepting that they're not necessarily accusing him of anti-Semitism. Although it might not be a bad idea, that's not what's happening. And perhaps a little bit more care could be taken in dealing with these things. I also have seen via the Twitter machine at some point today that there's some indication that the FBI will in fact be looking into these rising incidents of anti-Semitism, which would be a perfect opportunity for the White House to point to this and say, we heard you and responded. But so far, they're not willing to do that. Ivanka apparently tweeted last night at some point, or at least it came to my attention last night, that, yes, this sort of rising number of attacks is unacceptable and people need to be safe in their places of worship, and we want to do something about it. Of course, other people pointed out, well, yeah, she's worried about this because, of course, her husband is Jewish. She is converted to Judaism. Her children are Jewish. They go to a Jewish center of worship and would, of course, want it to be safe. And maybe someone could talk her into feeling that way about Muslim places of worship as well. Let's not go crazy. I don't think we're going to get a Trump to do that, but it's a point well taken. And once again, I remind her rabbis that Purim will be an excellent opportunity to remind her of her special responsibility in this regard and find out whether she's ever going to take it seriously. I have a feeling she may, in fact, be able to talk to her dad about that, and he listens to her. And the fact that it hasn't happened yet is a little bit of a disappointment. But the administration is young yet. They're only a month in, although it feels like years. All right. Gideon says that Limby, is that Limbaugh? Limbaugh assures me that Trump is not playing much golf. Apparently that's a thing. And maybe it is that he only plays partial rounds every time he goes. I don't know. But the reporters have been very cautious, I must note, to spend yet more time on this stupid subject. The reporters have been very cautious about how they discuss his trips to the golf course. It's weird. And the source I used to get the number of trips, I mean, that's really how they put it. They were only able to say, and remember that for the round of golf with the Japanese Prime Minister, I don't know whether this is always the case, but it was certainly the case that one time everybody noted, oh, we're stuck here in the basement of the golf club and the windows are blacked out. There's black trash bags taped over the windows so that we can't take pictures. And then I noted that, and I probably didn't even put this aside, and maybe I can dig it up, but the source that I used for the number of trips to the golf course by Saturday, I think being 6, was very cautious in the way it phrased things and said, this is his 6th trip to one of his golf properties since inauguration, and each time he's gone, he's spent about 4 hours at the facility, which, for those of you familiar with the game, is about the amount of time it would take to play an 18-hole round of golf. But I found it very interesting that the reporters were only willing to say that he had dressed in golf attire, gone to his golf courses, spent a 4-hour period there, and then returned to Mar-a-Lago during these outings. I guess they almost never actually allow the press to observe him playing golf, which is both out of keeping with tradition and unusual in a different sense entirely. It's known that he likes to golf. But I wonder whether they're actually doing that so that, for the purposes, why would they even try? For the purposes of disputing the amount of golf he's playing. I mean, I guess he's put himself in a unique situation in that he has spent so much time complaining about Obama's golf that they might realize that it would be embarrassing and hypocritical. But even that would not be in keeping with Trumpism. What does he care about being embarrassed? Think about what he's been taped saying. Now he's embarrassed? It's golf that embarrasses this guy? I don't know. He's a bit of an oddball. What can I tell you? All right. Moving on to other subjects. I should see whether... Oh, yes. Mad Hatter asks whether partial rounds of golf equal lack of stamina. Donald claims all the stamina. That is true. That's a good point. That's a possibility that... we'll have to tease him about that one. Okay. Let's see. Other things... I should take a look down my tweet stream. My tweet stream is a pretty good indication of what I find interesting and important. And it doesn't always... Not everything that I tweet or retweet makes it into Pocket. It's probably a better... I should probably abandon Pocket and use this. Let's see. More important things going on over the weekend. The G20 meeting I mentioned in passing in probably the Friday show. And it didn't strike me until over the weekend that I was like, G20, wait a minute. Why is Trump playing golf at Mar-a-Lago and the G20 is going on elsewhere? Shouldn't he be there? It turns out it was the G20 meeting of foreign ministers, that the heads of state were not necessarily all expected to show up. It wasn't one of those G20s, so I guess he's off the hook on that one. So he sent Mike Pence, who's not the foreign minister, but Rex Tillerson, I guess, would be our equivalent of a foreign minister. I don't know whether... I think he probably went too. He's not really super up to speed on things yet, having just recently been confirmed. But apparently Mike Pence spent the time there doing all the things that the American Secretary of State in a normal regime would be doing. That is to say, reassuring the members of the G20 and our allies in particular that we stand with them and nothing's going to change about that. But instead, he did that, and at the same time, Steve Bannon here at home worked hard to undo all of that, by which I mean I have read the tweet of Brian Klass, described himself here as a fellow at LSE government, a doctorate from Oxford on top of all this stuff, an ex-U.S. campaign advisor, as a matter of fact, based in London, and he was providing us with the observation that, yes, good, while Mike Pence was doing the work of reassuring everyone in the European Union of America's continuing commitment to that experiment, all of that was being undone at the same time by Steve Bannon, according to a Reuters article, herein quoted. We'll take a look at the clip he pulled from that. In the week before U.S. Vice President Mike Pence visited Brussels and pledged America's steadfast and enduring commitment to the European Union, White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon met with a German diplomat, whether it was here or there, I do not know, and delivered a different message. According to people familiar with the talks, Bannon, these people said, signaled to Germany's ambassador to Washington that he viewed the EU as a flawed construct and favored conducting relations with Europe on a bilateral basis. I imagine that probably took place here. Bannon probably spent the weekend at Mar-a-Lago, and I think he just sticks as close to Trump at all times as possible, and the real work of dealing with higher-ups from the G20 is left to Pence. I don't know whether that's because they have confidence in Pence's ability to do it, or whether it's all just a distraction game to them, and they don't really care what Pence says. Pence, you go pretend to do that other stuff, and we'll do the real stuff back here. All right, let's see. I'm going to scroll back in my own timeline to see if I can remind myself of the various things about which I thought we were right or nearly right and could have had a terrific day yesterday on the air, but didn't because we took the time off to use the President's Day to go shopping for a car, which, by the way, is an awful time to go if you're shopping for a used car, because that's not where all the discounts and bargains are, but it's still extremely busy because everybody's off from work and you don't really get any help from anybody. But maybe the more time you spend staying away from car dealers, the better. Anyway, let's see. Where were we with this? Yes. Okay. So some more scrolling to do. There was oh yes, right. So lots more news on Felix Sater. So we definitely want to catch up on some of that. What else was there? Well, at any rate, the third thing that came up yesterday was the controversies finally emerging into the mainstream, I guess we could say, about Milo Yiannopoulos, who's gotten some attention on this show. Yes, I remember the other thing now, and it's related to Milo. So Milo, he's a weirdo and a person that nobody should have anything to do with for a number of reasons. And then on top of which, it turns out that he made some insane comments at some point on tape, of course, because everything about him is on tape. If it's not being broadcast somewhere, he's probably not interested in it. But apparently at some point, and I did not dig a great deal into this, he spent some time in the past defending, and I guess people are splitting hairs on whether it's pedophilia or pederasty, if I have it correct. But essentially, apparently he offered an elaborate defense of sexualizing young boys, young teenage boys at an early age, like 13, and that it was normal and a good idea and good for everybody. And I mean, he even went so far as to say, well, thanks to the Catholic Church for doing it because it's a service to everybody, which on top of being rather reprehensible and a glossing over of rape, which fits into the whole rape culture puzzle that's also intricately tied up in the alt-right weirdness, I assumed, I think dragging the Catholic Church into it was just sort of another trademark Milo kind of thing, alt-right / Milo idea of saying, how can we make this more shocking and offensive so that we get even more attention for it? I don't know what he means. I don't know what it means. I don't know what he means. I don't care what he means. It doesn't matter to me, except insofar as to say he's a garbage person, and that people who listen to and defend him risk garbageness themselves. Which brings me to the other sort of third point, which was, I told you Louise Mensch was weird, and she is, and this is by no means definitive, but once everybody found out that, realized that the information was out there and had it brought to their attention that Milo Yiannopoulos was essentially defending the platform of NAMBLA, and that's not even a reference to Jon Stewart's persistent jokes about NAMBLA, but actually, yes, he was in fact defending that platform to the extent that it is a platform. Well, gee whiz, everybody heard about that. Now, he had been scheduled to give a keynote address at CPAC, the super conservative, ultra right-wing Washington gathering every year. And they were, to that point, willing to defend him and unceasingly on free speech grounds. Well, you might not, but free speech, and we're dedicated to that on this side. And you liberals do so much for the tolerant left. They never. Well, anyway, once it was revealed that somebody had dug up this tape about him making these comments about sexualizing and raping 13-year-old boys, they said, you know what? We were cool with all the other rapes and the sexism and the racism and the xenophobia and the anti-Semitism and everything. But this one really bothers us. And there's an awful lot wrapped up in that. But anyway, they canceled his keynote address, on top of which Simon & Schuster apparently finally realized, my God, this guy is actually not just a controversial figure, but in fact possibly a criminal weirdo on top of it all, and rapist, and child molester, Maybe we shouldn't print his book. And guess what? They're not gonna. They canceled the book deal, too. So now free speech sucks, et cetera, on top of all. Anyway, Louise Mensch, I noticed, had this to say. Among other comments that she made, she basically said, oh, I didn't realize exactly what a weirdo he was. So that makes me mad, and I'm no longer going to be friends with him. So it was the ultimate outcome of all that was that she said, well, our friendship ends because I didn't realize what he was out there defending. But before that, and I guess that's good. Before that, though, I wanted to point this one out. I found this tweet here that I don't know what she was responding to. Let's see. Graham Linehan, who tweets, his handle is Glinner, Glinner, and many of you probably follow along with him. But he basically summed up her position as, I only liked him when he harassed game developers, black women, and rape victims. Apparently that's what he makes of Louise Mensch's tweet. I guess it's linked here too. Let's take a look and see if we can't see the whole bunch of them here. The tweet he's referring to, yes, right. I used to be friendly with Milo. At no time did I have any idea that he defended child rape of 13-year-olds. That is at an end now, and I assume by that she means her friendship, or her being friendly with Milo, as opposed to, we don't really know whether the child rape is at an end now. Though that would be an excellent idea for Milo's lawyer to suggest to him at a bare minimum. It might also be something he wants to talk to a counselor about at some point. But, hey, you never know. Anyway, she used to be friendly with Milo. She says now that that's all at an end. But what I found interesting was that, I guess, I don't know, is this a follow-up tweet at some point? She's responding again. I have to take a look at that again. The Graham Linehan tweet. I only liked him when he harassed game developers, black women, and rape victims. She says he didn't, but he did. But I guess she didn't view all of his prior activity as harassment of all these people. She says he didn't. Then this is the killer here. Do I stand with the gamers of Gamergate? Yep, nothing changed. So, again, you can have views that are correct on one thing and views that are wildly, insanely incorrect on another, and still be credited for having correct views on this one thing, and that one thing at this point would be her virulent anti-Trumpism and her belief that the fact that her anti-Trumpism arises from her belief in his ultimate corruption and connection to corrupt Russian officials and oligarchs. And I think she's largely right in that. But as you might have been able to tell from the last couple of shows, I am reluctant to sign on with Louise Mensch. And this is the capper, in my view. And so those of you who have wondered, well, what do you mean? Or I don't really see it your way. Okay, so now you'll likewise want to draw a line, I'm sure, and say, okay, I believe she may be right about the source of much of Trump's corruption. But don't sign on to the Louise Mensch bandwagon just yet. She is cutting Milo Yiannopoulos loose because child molestation, but is willing to say, do I stand with the gamers of Gamergate? Yes, nothing changed. Disqualifying, in my view, and that, I mean, if that's not the grain of salt you were looking for, then I don't know what to help you with. All right, Gideon says, similarly, I ended my friendship with co-pilot Roger Murdoch. Okay. Justice, maybe it was actually Milo running Pizzagate, but out the back door of Breitbart. And that's another good point, and I did see somebody make it over the weekend, that, oh, look, the people defending pedophiles and pedophilia were actually homegrown here at Breitbart while they were cultivating Pizzagate culture the whole time. Another amazing coincidental deflection and projection problem. Okay, Rebecca Romans sending me, I guess this must be one of the latest memes. Milo says, make NAMBLA great again. And giving that the okay sign, which apparently has taken on a second life as a sort of white supremacist / Nazi gang sign that they flash as was done in the pictures of the right-wing bloggers who had been credentialed to the White House press office. They snapped photos of themselves and circulated, making the same sort of crazy white power gang signs. So that was fun. And somebody else claims that that's the weird thing that Stephen Miller was doing with his hands when he was recently photographed for a news spread as well. Just kind of pointing that out. There's a lot of weirdness going on here, and but I wanted to read this thing. I thought there was this fantastic thread with about Milo, and clearly written by somebody who has covered his garbage much more closely, and which I picked up in the middle, having seen somebody retweet one of the, I don't know, maybe like the 8th or 10th tweet of this tweet storm. And it made me think, oh, that's a good reminder that our constant refrain here on the show, that the alt-right and Trump world are sex cults, and in many ways the same sex cult, may have yet more validity, and this might be a story that has even more legs. And then I went back and I read the tweet storm from the beginning, and I said well, yeah, this is it. Well, one, it was a good thread and everybody should read it. And two, in case you're wondering why I would be asking you to read it, it would be that I think some portion of it is can be read in support of the alt-right as a sex cult theory. It's not exactly on the nose, but I was just sort of shorthanding it. It was late at night, and I thought, oh, what's the difference? I'll retweet this thing, and rather than simply retweeting the first message of the tweet storm and then saying thread, I don't know, I've somehow thought, oh, that's kind of trite. What will I say instead about that? And I said, it's a sex cult, this thread says. But it's pointed out to me, that's not really what the thread says. So let me read it to you, because I recommend it, and I think it makes some excellent points. And then it turns out the author was very disappointed that I used it that way, because that either wasn't the intention, or maybe she would not agree with that characterization, period. I'm not really sure, but this is somebody who's made a much closer study of Milo and Gamergate, which I've only kind of touched on the surface, because it's something that is peeking through occasionally into mainstream news, and I've never understood what the hell those guys were all about, and I've dismissed it offhandedly as, partly, not dismissed it, but I've labeled it with, I can understand it a little bit better as a sex cult, and not in any, I was going to say, not in any traditional, is there a traditional sense of a sex cult? I don't know. What I mean is, they're very odd people, and they have very odd views about a lot of things. And I think that rather than trying to understand them as a political ideology, for instance, the alt-right, I don't know that Gamergates would describe themselves as having a political ideology necessarily. Maybe they would. But the alt-right seems to be, that kind of formulation, right, seems to suggest that there's a political philosophy or a political ideology behind it. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case. And it was easier for me to understand what they were doing and what was driving them, to the extent I paid any attention to it, by viewing them as chiefly being motivated by sexual issues as opposed to political issues, although there's certainly a lot of room for overlap there. All right, so here's the tweeter. Nora Reed is, or I assume the name. That's the Twitter handle. Nora, Nora, Reed, Reed. And the first of the tweets that I can make out in this tweet storm begins this way. How were we supposed to know that pedophile apologia would be the thing that would get people to give a crap about Milo? I have to pretend that I am going to be radio friendly with this one. I know, and it's probably best read in the original, but I'm doing my best for our friends at We Act Radio. How are we supposed to know that pedophile apologia would be the thing that would get people to give a crap about Milo? And it continues from there. It's not like they ever cared about it before. Some abbreviations I don't quite understand here. TWCSA. And that might be just because I'm out of tune with the area of sexual politics that's being dealt with here. I don't know. We elected a probable child rapist, it continues, who has extremely creepy pictures of him with child models circulating. I don't know if that's more than Ivanka, but anyway. 8chan has been a hub for circulating child porn for ages, and everyone knew. And I do believe I've seen that mentioned. Not everyone knew, but everyone who knows anything about 8chan apparently knew, and we should all know something about these guys if that's what they're doing, right? Circulating anime art of sexualized children is one of the things Gamergate and the alt-right is known for. And I have noticed that, and I have always found it weird, and I wondered exactly why that was the case. And I thought, to me, this does fit a little bit with the idea that they're really more motivated by sexual issues than political ones. I did notice, I always found that weird. For a bunch of, I guess if you're used to your traditional tough guy image, and we're all alpha males and we're tough and everything, and why the association with this weird looking, and I guess under traditional analysis would be the sort of thing that now you would get in trouble for saying is girly looking anime, these cartoons. And they're very strange. It's a weird association, and I thought maybe it was one of those tongue-in-cheek irony things. They were ironically associating themselves with these very delicate, fairy-like characters because it was so ironic, because they were so tough and alpha male-ish. But this makes a more interesting point. That a lot of this anime art is sexualization of children. And it's so pervasive in the genre. I've always found it kind of a disturbing, weird thing, and I didn't really necessarily put my finger on it, but and it's surely unfair to some people who actually appear to appreciate it for a different reason, but then I don't know whether it's, I don't know that everybody would agree that there really could ever be another reason. I don't know. I'm way out of my depth in analyzing that. I always found this stuff odd, and an association with it alongside what appeared to be a political movement, but that had, the weird overtones of sexual issues. It never made any goddamn sense to me whatsoever. So it was interesting to see her point that out. And then it says here, as though it were a quote, "It's not pedophilia to be attracted to adolescents," unquote, and, quote, "remove the age of consent," have been pillars of MRA ideology for years, men's rights advocates, right? So apparently this is something that gets circulated in these groups, that it's not pedophilia to be attracted to adolescents, and remove the age of consent. Apparently big deals in MRA ideology, and we know that we've talked a number of times, not that much, not like these folks have. These people are immersed in untangling this, or at least Nora Reid appears to be, and probably with good reason. I don't know what the reason is, but I'm sure it's good, and whatever, even if it's a terrible reason, she seems to have done pretty well with it. So I find that interesting. The connections between MRA and Gamergate and pickup artists and the alt-right and Milo and all of this stuff that I just lumped under the umbrella of sex cult because I didn't know what else to do with it. So, these kinds of statements, apparently pillars of MRA ideology for years, and people on the supposed left, and okay, now this is where we get ourselves in trouble. I am probably going to be portioned out on this one. Maybe I'm not left enough. I don't know. It doesn't matter very much to me. Identifying as left doesn't mean a great deal to me, but okay. Anyway, I'm interested. And people on the supposed left who were doing the free speech crap about it, and I wasn't doing that, at least, until now, are so effing infuriating. And they were, even to me. So maybe I still count as left up to this point. I get in trouble later on. Because so many of us have been talking about this for years and begging people with the power to actually help us to do so. Okay. And this is a common theme in this area and in many others. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I stumble onto something and, as Greg has been preaching for the last couple of weeks, right? Don't shame Trump supporters. I think it's okay to go and shame some of these Trump supporters, but you know what he's getting at, right? But don't, and also not to shame people who are late to realizations that you have been on for years. But this is one of the most common themes in online discussion, other than just simply typing source or link or this surprises you why. Probably close on the heels of all those things is, people who know things and then are suddenly interesting to other people who don't know those things, kind of get the, I've been on this for years, why have you been asleep treatment, and that's kind of a little bit off-putting, but it's fine, because there's legitimate grievance here, and it's okay, and I can get over it if you can. You want to continue? So many of us have been talking about this for years and begging people with the power to actually help us to do so. And people like, look who's in trouble now, Kurt Eichenwald. People like Kurt Eichenwald weren't listening because most of the people he was victimizing, Milo was victimizing, were trans. And that's probably at least partially true. I haven't been listening either, but I was mostly, to the extent that I was interested in Milo Yiannopoulos, it was he's being horrible to a lot of people. And I guess when he first came to my attention, it was because people were saying, yeah, he's doing this college tour and he's using the opportunity under the guise of free speech. He's getting himself college speaking gigs, and what he's actually doing with those gigs is outing members of that college community's trans community and pointing them out and outing them and calling on people to attack them and nothing, to attack them, period. I mean, the end. And that seemed like the sort of a horrible thing to do, and I said, that sounds like a terrible person. So I was late to the Milo thing. I mean, for a long time I didn't know who he was, and I guess the first time he came to my attention was when it was revealed that Milo was writing for Breitbart, but he actually had like a giant army of interns doing all his writing and just slapping his name on it. And I said, that sounds dishonest, but who is Milo Yiannopoulos? And then over the next couple of months, it became clear that, he's this horrible person who, among other things, goes around college campuses and whips up crowds into frenzies to go beat up trans people. That is also bad. That's worse, in fact, by far, than, claiming the writing of his interns as your own. I don't care about it. That's just plain old dumb, and the other's dangerous and horrible and disgusting. Anyway, Was Kurt Eichenwald not listening? I did notice that Eichenwald tweeted, I think over the weekend when this big pedophilia defense scandal came out, said, well, I used to think Milo was entertaining, but now I see that he's horrible. So point of differentiation between myself and Kurt Eichenwald, I never thought Milo was entertaining. There was nothing about him that made it like Trump. I admit, I fail there and have occasionally said, well, he's sort of entertaining. I was never entertained by Milo. I never knew who he was. And when I found out what he talked about, I said, that's not entertaining. Even when he wasn't bashing trans people. It's just stupid being provocative for no particular reason. And then when it came to actually attacking individual people or types or communities of people, I said, well, then that's horrible on top of being intentionally provocative for no good reason. But I'm not listening either. That becomes clear later in the thread. People like Bill Maher, who of course had Milo Yiannopoulos on his show the other day and defended it again under, free speech. We got to hear from all the controversial people, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know whether he's reversed himself now in light of the pedophilia comments or not, but probably. People like Bill Maher were giving him platforms to spread his vitriol and normalize his beliefs, which include that effing kids is okay. It says here, next, we were seeing think pieces like this, and linking to the Twitter account of, I have to click through to go and see, Matt Teitelbaum, whose tweets are now protected, apparently, so I guess people got particularly mad about this. He is apparently president of the College Democrats of Maryland, and I guess in that capacity was tweeting we got to have free speech on campus and protect it and exchange of ideas, et cetera, et cetera. May disagree with his, but defend to the death the right to do it. That sort of position, I imagine, is what was up. There was another think piece that particularly disturbed her, this one by Matthew D'Ancona, who says in a Guardian column, there must be free speech even for Milo Yiannopoulos. So Nora found those particularly disturbing. We've been talking about the sexual violence of these people for years. And I thought, good. I've been interested in at least their weird sexuality for months. Could I maybe read some more and find out? Well, I read on. Gamergate, the test run for the alt-right, interesting way of putting it, was started by a domestic abuser to get a mob to abuse his ex for him. An interesting view of it. And probably, probably, my guess is factually true. Although I am sure that the founder of the Gamergate would say, and I had some slightly different motive, but I don't really care that he thinks he had that. This view of it feels and sounds pretty right. But again, I don't know what I'm talking about with this stuff. One of their poster boys, Mark Kern, know nothing about him, was known for spreading often underage-looking anime porn. Again, the anime is weird. It just is. They organized on a website that was, and I'm sure there are some anime fans too, for whom it doesn't hold this same kind of overt sexual interest, but I don't know. Anime is certainly not my thing. I have no appreciation for it whatsoever. Let's see. They organized on a website that was started as a place to share child pornography. That's what 8chan is known everywhere for. And again, 8chan was probably old news by the time I even heard of 4chan, and so I would be way behind on that stuff. I can't speak to the motivations of the foundation of 8chan, but it wouldn't surprise me, so I'm willing to continue on. I'm not a pedophile. I'm actually what does this even say? Ephebo whatever. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. And that's a fake quote thing, right? That's something that they're likely to say. I'm not a pedophile, I'm actually whatever. Has been a rallying cry of the Redditors that evolved into Trump's base for years. Every single website that these young men radicalize on, a good use of the word, from 4chan to Stormfront to Return of Kings, which is I've never heard of, is full of apologia for sexual abuse. And I thought, again, yes, this does sound right. This does sound a little bit like the sex cult umbrella I was lumping everything under. The idea that they can get the sex they, quote, deserve, and that they hate the world for denying them, is a major thing they rally to. And I would imagine that that's not necessarily limited to sex with underage children, but a big part of what we also lump under the term of rape culture, that men can do this to women and should, and they're entitled to be able to do this to women, to rape them, to take the sex that they want. I skipped one here that says, sexual abuse, including that of children, is a core part of their ideology because they believe they are owed sex. The idea that they can get the sex they, quote, deserve and that they hate the world for denying them is a major thing they rally to. It's what draws so many men to the pickup artist subculture and to the MRA ideology. It's what started Gamergate. And this part was interesting too. She says, you know my honey bots? Apparently she programs Twitter bots in a very clever way, from what I understand from just this tweet. I don't think I've run into any of them, but an interesting idea. Here's what they do. They mention rape culture. And there are people who search for that. That is to say, there are people who search the internet for mentions of rape culture and then try to argue with whoever brought it up. And so she very cleverly programmed bots that simply go around making mentions of rape culture and are programmed to respond, I guess, in some way to people who try to argue with them, so that Gamergator, MRA, what else? Pickup artist, alt-right people, I guess, spin their wheels arguing with robots, which I think is brilliant. They claim, these people do, that rape culture doesn't exist, and literally term search on Twitter for people who mention it, looking for debates, which she puts in quote, for fun. Given who talks about this stuff, this basically means they're searching for rape victims to harass. This is their hobby. And I guess they're stunned in silence. I guess, that is largely who's going to be mentioning it. I mean, I guess other people could mention rape culture in order to say things like, yeah, I believe rape victims when they talk about rape culture, and it's something we ought to talk about. And I guess they could debate with those people, but hopefully you would end up muting weirdos like that and walk away from it. But I love the bot thing. Given, I just read this one. So these people hang out on 4chan and 8chan and Reddit. And they make friends there, and they normalize rape together. They normalize sexual attraction to children. They defend members of their community who get found out to be pedophiles and rapists. And they deflect like it's their effing job. For some of them, it is. They use the marginalizations that their targets have to attempt to paint them as any kind of sexual predator that they think will stick. Right? Interesting. You see what she means? They use the marginalizations that the targets have to attempt to paint them as any kind of sexual predator that they think will stick. They claim the trans women are pedophiles. They claim the black men rape white women. They used the claims of a supposed plague of migrants and refugees raping white women long before Trump did. Rape culture is a serious problem everywhere. It's normalized. People defend their rapist friends. True. But in the alt-right and the communities it incubated in, Reddit, 4chan, 8chan, etc., it's not an undercurrent. It's the mainstream. We've seen Milo sick his fans on people so they have to deal with hundreds of rape threats. True. We've seen him hang out with rapists like Roosh. Unfortunately, again, here, I'm out of my depth. I don't know who Roosh is, but not hard to imagine that that's exactly the case. Every time one of these movement's ringleaders is shown to be a rapist, a domestic abuser, a pedophile, etc., people act surprised. They do. That's true. At this point, if you missed the effing red flags, that's on you. And I guess it is, although I will say there's some number of us have missed not only the red flags, but that there was airspace to fly flags in. I mean, we're just basically, making our way through life without any knowledge of Milo Yiannopoulos or who he might be or why he would be interesting, and never coming across 4chan, 8chan, anything like it. So I missed the flags because I wasn't looking in the airspace. Didn't know it existed. But okay. Next time, listen to trans folks, listen to women, listen to black folks, listen to native folks, listen to survivors. I guess here, for my part, I would say me. I certainly don't feel like I'm not listening. It's that I'm not aware. And that's the biggest tripping point for, I guess, most people who I guess you would otherwise ordinarily dismiss as ordinary people and too mainstream for their own good. It's difficult to project out of yourself and ask yourself at every juncture of your life, how would other marginalized people respond to this otherwise ordinary situation? Because that's not the way most people live their lives. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess there'd be a different complaint about someone like perhaps Kurt Eichenwald or Louise Mensch if they say things like, well, I found Milo interesting and entertaining, and some points that he made were terrible and nutty, and others that he made were, horrible and unacceptable, and I want to compartmentalize about that. And then you say, well, see, that's really a big red flag. You can't compartmentalize that all that easily. Then you might say, okay, yeah, that's a good point. For my part, I was like, I don't know whether he's entertaining or interesting because I never heard of him, because I'm too wrapped up in getting used minivans to take the kids to Taekwondo with. I'm just not clued into that. But now that you mention it, that is a bit of a red flag. But on the other hand, I don't know, there's other people who I know who are very much politically aware. Look at what I'm seeing now. Zerlina Maxwell, who's, a good feminist by all accounts and attuned politically. Now, let's see, tweeting out a shot of her on set at MSNBC alongside Louise Mensch. I don't imagine that she had anything to do with the invitations, but I don't know. I don't think right now I wouldn't be too happy with a photo of me and Louise Mensch. I wouldn't retweet it. It's amazing how, I guess you could say the same thing over here, right? I mean, Louise Mensch says she's defending Gamergate and is still cool with Gamergate. That seems like a red flag that Zerlina should be made aware of. But you can miss flags. I guess it is on you, ultimately. But I don't know. I would say don't be too hard on people that are willing to listen, I guess. Next time, listen to them. Okay, I will, right? Listen to religious minorities, especially Muslim folks and Sikh folks. Listen to the people at the intersections of these groups. Because if you didn't hear any of this before, you were the ones not effing listening. And then there's a mic drop gif. And it's interesting and well worth looking into. Although, again, I mean, I don't know how far I'd go with the, well, you weren't listening, which to me implies it was being said to you and you were ignoring it, versus, like most people, you were living your own life, and what was going on in the weird recesses of bizarre sections of the internet that are mostly cordoned off for good reason. I don't know. It was PTA back to school night. I didn't read 8chan. Thank you for telling me about it. Now, this comes up because I saw this interesting thread and I said, hey, to me, that overlaps somewhat with what I thought about the alt-right and their motivations over sexual issues. And so I said, hey, this thread, it seems to me, is an awful lot like the sex cult mentions that we've made in the past. And apparently not. I'll have to scroll back down and find it so that I can show you how I have been upbraided for it. Let's see. So I had said, like I said, it's a sex cult, says this thread, the thread that I just went through. She answered that about, let's see, some hours later, and a couple hours ago now, it says, she just says, yeah, no, it really doesn't. Oops. Uh-oh. And honestly, I'm not too big on this kind of oversimplification from someone with a platform who could have actually helped. And here I think we overestimate my platform, but maybe not. So here I'm sharing with you. The only tweet you've ever made about him, Milo, she says to me, before this, that wasn't making fun of his face, was linking to a piece about him by a TERF. And now it's another one of the terms that I have seen and forgotten what it meant. But yeah, I basically stay out of the Milo Yiannopoulos analysis game and say, look, whatever undermines him with the mainstream people who are paying his bills, I don't care. You know, yeah, he's a bit of a weirdo facially as well, on top of many things. But yeah, not really my area of expertise, certainly. And then it goes on then to say, I can't even be glad that people like me, Kagro X actually mentions, I'm in all those mentions there, are finally listening, because if they call rape culture a sex cult, they clearly aren't listening. Well, it wasn't rape culture that I was calling a sex cult, but an aspect of alt-right behavior and Trump world behavior. But yeah, it's an oversimplification. It was kind of a late night shorthand for Twitter, and I was misappropriating the thread, really, ultimately, I think, to say, well, I wanted to make this point about something else I was saying, and that's not right. So that's why I'm reading this. Let's see. And then there were a couple others. Ethel, who says, Kagro X, I think you need help with reading comprehension. I don't know that it's reading comprehension necessarily, but what I need to be corrected is, don't take this very involved long thread and turn it into something that it isn't. And I think that sounds like a pretty good point. I think ultimately we can conclude I misappropriated the thread. But I did want people to read it, so I read it to you. I think it's important in its own right. I think it sort of bears out at least the vague idea that the alt-right isn't a political ideology so much as it is some other thing, and a lot of it revolves around sex, and sex that they feel, I think, rightly they feel rightly that it's been marginalized. I think it's been rightly marginalized. And it's not, when they wrap it up in free speech or even, the feminization of America, and we're going to make that a political issue to the extent that they have done that kind of garbage, that it needs to be dismissed, that I think the political trappings they've wrapped themselves in are to try and deflect criticism that would otherwise be openly offered about what they're actually doing and actually talking about. Well, you have a forum here dedicated to the sexualization of children and rape culture. That's bad. Oh, well, it's free speech. Oh, well, you have me there, because free speech we're trained to believe in as, it's freedom, and I'll defend your right to say it to the death. And I think it's a disguise and garbage and ought to be dismissed for that reason. That cover ought to be dismissed. And I don't think that her thread is out of keeping with that, but I probably should have just left it at that. Colin Mitchell commenting, maybe brush up on your reading skills. I'll brush up on my listening skills. It wasn't a good read of it. That's true. Although, again, I chase the person away who's thinking maybe about understanding this stuff. But okay, I've been defensive about things too. It's natural. She's put an awful lot of time into this, and I imagine a lot of her followers and readers have as well. And it's sad and insulting to see something that has been explained pretty clearly be taken to mean something else. So let's see. For the most part, most people who I referred to the thread, I don't think that the reaction has been overly negative. So hopefully the rest of you can read through this without finding out that you're stupid or can't read or whatever it is, and will absorb these lessons properly. I hope that we all learned a little something about this. I learned a couple of things in addition to the actual point of the thread, that you can just let work like that stand on its own and simply say, this is kind of an important thread and you should read it. And it doesn't necessarily have to prove any point. I think I overreached in saying that it establishes the correctness of the sex cult idea. The sex cult idea probably needs some refinement anyway. So my apologies there to Nora, and I hope you learned something in sharing this thread with you. I mean, this was an enormous chunk of the show. And we could have spent it bashing Trump some more. But this, I think, I don't know. This felt deeper, and I hope you learned something from it too. I will move on from it there and leave it at that. And apologize for getting anybody upset about this because of a kind of a careless misappropriation of the real direction of the thread. So I think, I don't know, I'm done? All right. Moving on, though, to a couple of other issues. Let's see. Oh, yes. Here's something that I thought was real important from Marcy Wheeler over... Oh, no, and it wasn't even from Marcy Wheeler. It was from Bill, from BMAS, writing at Marcy's blog, Empty Wheel, that also touches on a couple of other themes we've hit on, probably too simplistically, in the past. Stephen Miller's and Trump's gross repoliticization of the Department of Justice. BMAZ, who you'll find on Twitter as BMAZ, B-M-A-Z, in case you had no idea how that might be spelled. This, a February 19th piece. There was some legitimate concern about inappropriate machination of the Department of Justice when Trump named and confirmed Jeff Sessions as his Attorney General. Typical discussion followed this by Isaac Arnsdorf at Politico. And a quote here. Donald Trump suggested on the campaign trail that he could use the Justice Department to fulfill his political agenda, taunting Hillary Clinton by threatening to throw her in jail over her email scandal. Now, Jeff Sessions, Trump's pick for Attorney General, will have to decide whether to follow his predecessors by vowing not to let politics drive the DOJ's decision-making. All right. One interesting entree into politicization of the DOJ. That was one, and a serious level of concern, BMAS writes. Today, we find said concern not close to being deep enough as to how the Trump White House would try to run justice as merely a lever of their extreme politics. But via the New York Daily News comes a little noticed and truly frightening report of just how renegade and ridiculous the fine-tuned machine the Trump White House is, determined to be in politicizing the DOJ. In an article captioned, Stephen Miller called Brooklyn U.S. Attorney at home and told him how to defend travel ban in court, comes the stunning news that in the chaotic hours after President Trump signed on a Friday afternoon the sloppily written executive order meant to fulfill his Muslim ban campaign promise, Stephen Miller called the home of Robert Capers to dictate to the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District how he should defend that order at a Saturday emergency federal court hearing. pausing for just a second to see if I can make clear. You've likely heard this news, but yes, if you haven't, the rather astonishing fact here being that the guy with no legal training, and sometimes people with no legal training can have surprisingly clear legal reasoning, and like, for instance, Marcy is just such a person. There's nothing magical about legal training. It's just a method of thinking, and if you can actually think that way on your own without the formal training, or can pick up that method of thinking along the way with your own informal training, then it's just as good. And so I guess it's entirely possible that Stephen Miller could think he has the same skill, and he might. It would be difficult to tell whether he has what we would traditionally think of as legal training, or the ability to think the way that a traditionally legally trained person thinks, because he's thinking about the outer limits of constitutional law in a constitutional hardball kind of way that, while not inconsistent with legal training, is, well, it's a very different kind of legal thinking that goes on at the outer edges of constitutional law. Probably guessed it from hearing Armando and I discuss things, from time to time, that fit under that umbrella in ways that sound more like just plain strong-arm realpolitik, right? Armando's thinking that, look, the justices of the Supreme Court on both ends of the spectrum are as politicized as any elected politician. They work in much the same way. They have an idea of how they want a case to come out, and they find legal reasoning to get there, which, by the way, kind of reminds me of what we were just discussing in some ways about, the alt-right and Gamergate, etc., about how they wanted to essentially to get to the conclusion that the kind of sex they thought they deserved ought to be permitted and protected, and their discussion of it along the way to getting what they want ought to be protected under free speech and political discourse rights, and that was in fact garbage. In many ways, it reminds me of kind of what we think about the courts doing. We tend to blame the conservative side of the spectrum for this more often than the liberal side of the spectrum, but I guess it's entirely possible, almost certainly the case, that the people on the conservative side of the spectrum suppose this about people on the liberal, or the justices on the liberal side of the spectrum, that they too formulate the outcome they want, and then the trappings of legal reasoning are slapped on top in order to protect it from being attacked as just mere opportunism, in the same way as Gamergaters pretend that they're having political discourse rather than just seeking people to help them harass their exes. Anyway, this is a pretty tremendous departure from ordinary practice. Like your basic everyday lawyer practices in a very different space. The training's the same, and you certainly get the constitutional law training, but it's rules-based stuff. This is what the precedent is. You got to stick to precedent. That's what the rules say. And so this is the way we construct our arguments. Versus, for instance, the kind of constitutional hardball that says, we can filibuster a Supreme Court nominee for a year so that we lock the court in at 4-4 rather than having it have a 5-4 liberal, quote-unquote, liberal advantage. And from there on, we press our cases and redefine terms as we go along. Or, you know what, another great example of it is the evolution of Second Amendment jurisprudence that Armando has discussed on the show in the past, that there never really was until recently a serious argument made by mainstream legal scholars that the Second Amendment guaranteed a personal right to go about armed in public at all times, but that enough writing under the guise of scholarly investigation in law school journals, and then finally arguments in court, and just plain political arguments along the sidelines by people who are recognized as political actors and legal thinkers because they publish under these guises, I guess basically is how they come to be recognized this way. There just was enough momentum or I guess enough of the trappings of legal reasoning had eventually been created that the clerks for justices like Scalia, Alito, Thomas, and others felt comfortable in finally putting forth a draft decision recognizing a right to go about in public armed at all times based on the Second Amendment, even though historically it wasn't there, and the writings that underpinned it said very much different. Did this make, I don't know if I made things muddier there or made things clearer, but what I meant to get around to was saying that at that level, when you're talking about overturning the mechanical legal norms with a new kind of legal reasoning, or what looks like legal reasoning, it's not necessarily, in some cases, not really necessarily all that different looking to anyone, whether they're trained or not. The arguments of a serious constitutional scholar who's really pushing the envelope and working at the bleeding edge of constitutional law versus your average wacko who's read nothing but heard that the Second Amendment guaranteed something about guns, and so here he is in Walmart with a gun in his waistband arguing with the cops about what Second Amendment jurisprudence really means and how they can't actually arrest him for having a concealed weapon because part of it was sticking out of his belt and so therefore it wasn't concealed. But even if it was, so what? Because shall not be infringed. What part don't you under? Yeah. At some point, they don't. There's not a lot of daylight in between them. So here's Stephen Miller without legal training, but maybe just that kind of thinker, or maybe he's just a faker, calling the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York and trying to dictate to him how the travel ban executive order ought to be defended in court, or had to be defended in court. That's very interesting. I wonder what he made of that. By the way, I guess here's the upshot. Sloppily drawn, this executive order, and same guy who drew it so sloppily dictated the defense. Guess what? It lost, and lost horribly, and they have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. And apparently this week is when they're set to relaunch this thing and take a second crack at a Muslim ban that will somehow pass muster with the courts. But you can take away from this, Stephen Miller is looking more and more like he doesn't actually have any idea what he's doing, having drafted this thing so poorly and dictated its defense and been shut down everywhere the thing has been tested. We'll see whether he gets any better this second time. So, back to the New York Daily News article being quoted here by BMAS. We learned, one, in the chaotic hours after the signature, Miller is calling Robert Capers to dictate to him, as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, how they should defend that order in a Saturday court hearing. That's according to a federal law enforcement official with knowledge of the call, which happened as Department of Justice attorneys canceled plans, found babysitters, and rushed back to their Brooklyn office to try and find out exactly what it was they were defending and who was being affected by it. How many people were already being held in America, how many people were being barred from arriving here, and the exact status of each person. The full article at the New York Daily News is mandatory reading, and I've skimmed some of it, and I agree you should have a look at it. But let that sink in for a second. 31-year-old Stephen Miller, a wet-behind-the-ears, extreme right-wing ideologue with white nationalist leanings and no legal training, much less law degree. Though I feel a little less, I'm a little less angry about that. Called up a United States attorney at home to dictate how the DOJ would operate in an emergency litigation situation in a United States District Court. Stunning, Bill says, is too weak of a response. Shocking is insufficient. It's actually hard to know what the proper words are for this. I asked Matthew A. Miller, former OPA head under the Obama DOJ, for a thought on the implications of Stephen Miller's hubris in this instance. His reply was, the last time a White House started dictating demands to U.S. attorneys, the sitting Attorney General had to resign in disgrace. This raises yet another in a series of questions about whether the Sessions Justice Department will be independent from the Trump White House. He's, of course, talking about Alberto Gonzales and the politicization of the U.S. Attorney's Office, which we probably would do well to remind everyone during the hearings on which Sessions was known to be the point man for the defense of the way the Bush administration ran the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was the guy that the DOJ would send suggested questions to and suggested tacks for use in the hearings. He was the point man on that. We'll see if we can dig up that information for you, although I do believe it's something we have mentioned to you on the show in the past. BMAS goes on, exactly. I would have said unprecedented above, along with stunning and shocking, but for what occurred during the period of the Bush-Cheney regime when the interaction and control of the DOJ from the White House was extreme, and ultimately blown up as beyond unacceptable and appropriate by more reasoned minds and authorities. And I might add, substantially due to the fourth estate of the press, that Trump blithely and ignorantly describes as enemies of the American people. Yes, it really is that important of a moment now with Stephen Miller. Note, no relation to Matthew A. Miller. That's not hard to imagine. There's a lot of Millers around. And the extreme hubris and lack of institutional awareness, competence, or control, and obvious disdain for any by the Trump administration. Back in 2007, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse created and displayed at a Senate hearing a stunning graphic displaying the shocking difference between communication between the Clinton White House and the DOJ and the ridiculous political input that the Bush-Cheney White House had to DOJ. With the grossly inappropriate statements of President Donald Trump as to how he, quote-unquote he, will direct prosecutions of political enemies and other criminal and military defendants, leakers and others, to the literally insane conduct of Stephen Miller here, it is time to remember Senator Whitehouse's chart. It is also time to wonder if Sheldon Whitehouse and other members of the Senate Judiciary Committee have the cojones to take the fight for the Constitution and the integrity of the justice system once again to a renegade White House. And the Trump White House has quickly made the Bush-Cheney White House look better in the rearview mirror, as truly craven as they were. And yes, the situation is exactly that dire if you recall the same Stephen Miller being sent out and directed to all Sunday political shows to declare and mandate that, quote, our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see as we begin to take further actions that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned. This is straight up an Article 2 branch declaration of pure tyranny by Stephen Miller and Trump. This is a serious problem, and this is an administration making good on its promise and determination in that regard. Wow. Well, the chart is difficult to describe, but I'll just have to leave it for you to examine in our afternoon roundup that Scott will help us prepare. Let's see. What other interesting... Arliss Bunny has a a bit of all caps going on here. Let's see. This just happened. DHS unveils sweeping plan to deport undocumented immigrants. This via the Indy Star. I guess we better take care and take a look at this, because as we were closing out on Friday, they were already threatening at that point, and I missed it right at the end of the show. Everybody giving me the heads up that they were, was it the AP that had got a hold of a draft memo from the Department of Homeland Security, what was purported to be a draft memo, discussing the mobilization of 100,000 National Guard troops to help round up and deport undocumented immigrants. A plan that the White House denied was ever going to be implemented, and at first denied even existed or was under any consideration. But they produced the document, and I don't think anybody disputed the authenticity of the document. That simply came around in the end to, well, someone proposed this, but we're not considering it. Well, let's see. Because right now, USA Today reports, and I guess this reprinted in the Indy Star, out where Arla's money is, Homeland Security unveils sweeping plan to deport undocumented immigrants. And boy, that sounds an awful lot like what we were talking about on, or what people were talking about on Friday and then didn't happen or was denied by the administration. Let's see if it's still denied. The Department of Homeland Security issued a sweeping set of orders Tuesday, that's today, that implement President Trump's plan to increase immigration enforcement, placing the vast majority of the nation's 11 million undocumented immigrants at risk of deportation. The memos instruct all agents, including Customs and Border Protection, that's CBP, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, as we sometimes know it, to identify, capture, and quickly deport every undocumented immigrant they encounter. And that's, so far, I think, consistent with the individual stories that have been popping up with increasing frequency of particularly insensitive arrests in this context. So I guess there's something to be said for this new memo here. The memos require undocumented immigrants caught entering the country to be placed in detention until their cases are resolved, increasing the ability of local police to help in immigration enforcement, calling for the hiring of 10,000 more immigration agents, and planning to begin on an expansion of the border wall between the United States and Mexico. So far no mention of 100,000 National Guard troops, not that there are that many available anyway. I think they just perhaps overestimated what kind of reserves they actually have on that score, but still pretty serious. And of course, those of you who have been following, for instance, the privatized prisons issue probably perked your ears up at the mention of insisting that all undocumented immigrants be placed in detention until their cases are resolved. That's going to require quite a bit of capacity for the privatized prison sector. The memos make undocumented immigrants who have been convicted of a crime the highest priority for enforcement operations, but they make clear that ICE agents should also arrest and initiate deportation proceedings against any other undocumented immigrant they encounter. Department personnel have full authority to arrest or apprehend an alien whom an immigration officer has probable cause to believe is in violation of the immigration laws, one memo read. They also have full authority to initiate removal proceedings against any alien who is subject to removal under any provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act. A Homeland Security official who briefed reporters Tuesday said the deportation protections President Obama granted in 2012 to undocumented immigrants brought to the country as children will continue to be honored, so long as those immigrants abide by the rules of the program. The official spoke on condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to discuss details of the memos. More than 750,000 undocumented immigrants are eligible for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival Programs, or DACA. The order also details a broad plan to keep undocumented immigrants caught crossing the southwest border from making it to the interior of the U.S. They call for detaining all of them until their cases are resolved. Okay, so I think a slight clarification there. And it was clear from the way it was put, and I think I misread the way it was put earlier. And I guess detention until your case is resolved is for immigrants caught in the act of entering the country, as opposed to putting everybody in detention who they happen to find has been here undocumented for 10, 15 years. It might be a slightly different interpretation. Currently, many undocumented immigrants are processed by immigration agents, released around the country, and ordered to reappear for court hearings. The memo seeks to end that practice, known as catch and release, by ordering the construction of more jails along the southwest border to house detained immigrants until their cases are resolved. Sounds like they're hoping they'll get prison riots out of it. Maybe that's the law and order stuff they would like to bring to bear. Currently, the new directives also allow customs agents to send some people directly back to Mexico, whether they're Mexican or not. Under previous administrations, people from Mexico and Canada could be deported directly back home, but people from all other countries, such as from Central America, had to be detained until they could be flown back to their country of origin. The memos do not mention the idea of using National Guard troops along the southwest border, as reported by several media outlets last week. Of course, they were looking at a different memo. So, but this version of the memo doesn't have it. I don't know whether it was their intention to remove it all along, or whether they felt caught out by the reporting over the weekend and decided to remove it, or they realized we don't have 100,000 National Guard troops to mobilize for this, so forget it. I'm not sure exactly what the situation is. All right. Coming up towards the end of the show, we'll see what else we can shoehorn in there. I'm going to leave the Felix Sater information perhaps for discussion on another day. I think it's very likely that you got your fill of the coverage, or probably even knew most of what got coverage over the weekend. I didn't see much in the way of new information being developed about Felix, just more widespread notice of who he is and what his connection has been. And I guess reminders of the fact that, one, Donald Trump in courtroom proceedings has denied even having any idea who he is or barely knowing Felix Sater. And also reminders of the fact that Felix used to distribute business cards that listed him as a senior advisor to Mr. Trump inside of the Trump organization, that Sater has maintained offices in Trump Tower, that Sater has been spotted and identified and recognized arriving at the Trump Tower during the campaign and declining to state the business he was there on. But I guess the newest information is that apparently they have Russians have been using Sater as a go-between with Trump up to the current date, and that he in fact has been carrying sealed communications between the governments back and forth. That sounds pretty amazing. And it's reported on over at, well, in a number of places, but it's actually treated over at Daily Kos on Sunday. Hunter picked this one up, the headline, if you're looking for it. Trump allies deliver plan to lift Russian sanctions by helping to topple the Ukrainian government. How do you like this one? He writes, the hits just keep on coming. A week before Michael T. Flynn resigned as National Security Advisor, according to the New York Times, a sealed proposal was hand-delivered to his office outlining a way for President Trump to lift sanctions against Russia. The players involved are a who's who of Trump-connected pro-Russian figures. Again, a quote from the Times, Flynn is gone, having been caught lying about his own discussion of sanctions with the Russian ambassador. But the proposal, a peace plan for Ukraine and Russia, remains, along with those pushing it. Michael D. Cohen, the president's personal lawyer who delivered the document, Felix H. Sater, a business associate, that's one way of putting it, who helped Mr. Trump scout deals in Russia. And remember, I have no deals in Russia, no deals in Russia. You look, there's nothing in Russia. Me, Russia, over here, me over here, Russia over there. Nothing in between. It's just air. There's nothing here. I have no deals in Russia. None. Zero. I just have a guy who scouts deals in Russia for me and who sucks horribly at it. So I don't have any, except the ones I do have under a different name and under corporations that I formed specifically to run those deals in Russia and didn't even bother to disguise. But other than that, nothing. I have none. Okay, sure. Sater, like they say, a business associate who helped Mr. Trump scout deals in Russia, and another party to this chain of custody here, a Ukrainian lawmaker, trying to rise in a political opposition movement shaped in part by Mr. Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. Wow. Cohen, Hunter writes, is under investigation by the FBI as part of the query into Russian influence in Trump's election. Sater is mafia-linked. A key part to the plan, led by pro-Russian Ukrainian lawmaker Andriy Artemenko, would be releasing alleged evidence of corruption by the current not pro-Russian enough Ukrainian leader, thus allowing fine men like Artemenko to take over the government and negotiate a long-term Russian lease of Crimea, and so forth. Artemenko even offered up that he had received encouragement for his plans from top aides to Mr. Putin, which is apparently something would-be government topplers are willing to brag about these days. The end result, if the current Ukrainian government was disposed of and a more Russia-tolerant faction took its place, thus achieving a peace with Russia, that may clear the way for the Trump administration to lift sanctions on Russia that resulted, which would in turn allow deals like now Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's $500 billion oil deal between ExxonMobil and Russia to go forward. All it requires is a more compliant Ukrainian government with the assistance of Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Paul Manafort's pals. This is an actual plan these people were willing to put down on paper. So yes, Sater back in the news. Very interesting to see. And we'll have to probe a little bit more about it and try and weave that together again. Let's see. Maureen tells us some breaking news here. Is this happening right now? Showing us the tweet of Kyle Griffin, I guess covering Trump, speaking at the NMAAHC. What are we looking at here? I like, is he in South Carolina? Okay. I like the state of South Carolina. I like all those states where I won by double digits. Is that for real? Once again, giving a speech and talking about his election victory. Very interesting, and yet another crazy disaster, unforced error by Trump. He's, what can you do? Guy needs to be 25th Amendmented out. Anything else that we can shoehorn in here before wrapping up the show? It was kind of a weird show, but we knew it would be going in. I guess the disruption happening here in the studio, as it were, not terribly surprising. Yes, okay. One last thing I want to enter into the record. As you know, Andrew Puzder dropped out of consideration, withdrew as Secretary of Labor designee. There is a new nomination, and Mother Jones has this reminder for you about him. It's R. Alexander Acosta. I always have trouble with those people who just use those first initials. I wonder what those names are. Alexander Acosta, the new Department of Labor Secretary designee, was at the center of a hiring scandal during the George W. Bush administration. Can you guess which one it was? Trump's new labor nominee oversaw politicized hiring at the Justice Department. We were just talking about that. Unbelievable. And now one of the guys intimately involved in that has landed in the Trump administration, or is about to anyway land in the Trump administration once again. So we'll dive into the specifics of that perhaps later on in the future, but I also will have to put on the record. Did I put this one aside somewhere? I must have. If I can't come up with it right away, I'll just put it this way. It turns out that Trump's Labor nominee also has another issue in his background. Here it is from Politico.com. Trump's Labor nominee, same guy, Acosta. Trump's Labor nominee oversaw sweetheart plea deal in, ready? Billionaire's underage sex case. You didn't think I could tie all of this stuff back together given how weird the show was, right? It turns out that Alexander Acosta was involved in the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein, the weirdo billionaire who flew around with underage models all the time and who, I guess, for some reason we didn't really see much mainstream media discussion of his palling around with Donald Trump because, yes, unfortunately, he apparently was also palling around with Bill Clinton, and that made things awkward. But now Clinton's not the president and Trump is, and so we have to pay attention to these things. It turns out that this terrible child molester, Jeffrey Epstein, who is, after all, the person who it is alleged provided, I guess you could say, Donald Trump with the underage victims who alleged that he raped them and for some time had in fact threatened to file suit making that claim and ultimately were decided to drop that suit. And then, of course, you saw the Tarrant County Republican chairman standing around with the jester hat and the big sign that I always retweet, Trump is a child rapist. That's the guy. That's the guy we're talking about. Jeffrey Epstein hanging out with Trump, facilitating this alleged rape. And they caught Epstein and they prosecuted Epstein and he got off quite lightly. And who was the lawyer? It's Donald Trump's nominee for Labor Secretary. How do you like that? Boy, everything is just so intimately connected here. It's, no pun intended, it's rather amazing. Last note, I guess, before closing things out, Monica tells us, Mommy CA20, tells us that Trump is visiting the new African American Museum, not South Carolina. That's what, and I was like, oh, what organization am I not figuring out? National Museum of African American History, right? Okay, so he's at the museum. Remember that, was it the first day of February that he said, oh, well, Black History Month, I'm going to go visit the African American Museum, and they said, what? The hell you are? You can't just walk in here. We have to prepare for these things. So I guess it takes about 21 days to get those visits lined up. He's there now, and that's who he's speaking to. Why in the world, then, the mention of South Carolina? I guess because, what? He won it? And was somebody there from South Carolina? I don't know. Well, you tell me. Thanks for clarifying that, Monica. It's difficult to keep up on all these bits and pieces as we are in progress with the show. But those things that I missed are, of course, on the table for Red Sky at Morning Tuesday on the after show coming up after this. Let's see if I can just skim quickly. We've got, the new information about Homeland Security. How far are they really going to go on their second go at the Muslim travel ban? And Pence's visit with NATO.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Much more to come on the after show. Valerie Plame back in the news, worried that Trump's recklessness will blunder us into a nuclear war. And the last half visit with Chris Reeves, a.k.a. Tom Servo 433. With all the interesting news, including a report on the retirement of a beloved Kansas Democratic state chair, coming up next.